Tonight we've got Sam Ratcliffe, who will speak to us on Texas female artists of the 19th century. Nice tie-in to the book and a way to get this whole thing started off. Sam retired in 2017 as the head of special collections in the Southern Methodist University's Jake and Nancy Hamon Arts Library, which holds the papers of artists Jerry Bywaters, Otis Dozier, and Octavio Medellin, as well as other collections documenting the cultural history of the Southwest. He holds a BA in History and Political Science from SMU, an MA in American History from the University of Oklahoma, and a Ph.D. in American Civilization from the University of Texas at Austin. Sam's award-winning 1992 book, Painting Texas History to 1900, analyzes paintings of events of Texas history as historical documents. He contributed an essay to and edited Jerry Bywaters' Interpreter of the Southwest, published in 2007, in conjunction with an exhibition he curated at the same time at the SMU's Meadows Museum. Please give a warm welcome to Sam.
Thank you, Scott. How many knowledgeable Jane Austen fans in the room? Michael mentioned Elmer Kelton, who I knew slightly. And when my daughters became enamored of Jane Austen, they kept going on and on about the opening sentence of Pride and Prejudice, which is, what is it? A man needs nothing so much as a good wife or something. It says that it's the best opening line of any novel there is. I said, no, the best opening line of any novel is Elmer Kelton, The Good Old Boys. After 5 days, Huey Calloway realized he was in need of a bath. That got the inevitable response, "Oh, Dad." I heard that a lot raising two daughters. Not that I ever deserved that, but I'm still old school. I know with PowerPoint you have the little cool way you can put the notes in the screen and all that jazz, but for one thing, I need bigger font. For another thing, I get a sense of accomplishment by throwing papers on the floor as I read. So, along with, I'm glad Howard Taylor's in Bonnie's Doghouse, because I'm now in Bonnie's Doghouse for listing her in my special thanks. But really couldn't have done it without her. And Michelle Johnson, I think, is the Bill Hill Archive is just a treasure trove. And there was, I think, iPad set up in one of the rooms for the key to the archive. The lounge area. Okay, all right, okay. And I'm sure that some of these names are very familiar to you all. I really couldn't have done this presentation without them, and I couldn't have done it without Light, because it was 5 years ago at the opening for the Texas Art 250 Years exhibition in San Antonio. Light said, "Hey, I want you to do a chapter on 19th century Texas women artists." I said, "Light, you know, they weren't actually a whole lot of those running around, but anyway," he said, "No, you can do it." I said, "Okay." So that's my chapter, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Okay. So now, not all of these artists were known to have been photographed or had portraits done. All were painters until the last artist, who was probably one of the most famous sculptors to come out of Texas. You can probably guess who that's going to be. So let me set the stage a little bit here. The 19th century Texas, new residents had widely varying reactions. Their perceptions of the place as an exotic, bountiful agrarian paradise suffused with, quote, a pure atmosphere. This coexisted with the grumblings about food, quote, polecat is the worst meat I ever tasted. See, people know what polecat is. Transportation difficulties and the frequent mixing of alcohol and politics, of course, was not unique to Texas. In 1845, one recent arrival in Tyler County, after delivering inventory of complaints on a variety of subjects ranging from diet to the region's insect population, declared the place to be, quote, the most perfect purgatory of any place on earth. Frederick Law Olmsted, the future designer of New York Central Park and many other public spaces, offered a conflicted assessment of Texas. In 1853, intent on demonstrating how Texas could become more prosperous by eliminating slavery, Olmsted described parts of the state as a combination of agrarian and utopian health resort. But he was also appalled by what he regarded as, quote, the degradation of most Texans who lived a hand-to-mouth, seemingly unproductive existence. Yet they were always eager to boast of the state's healthfulness and commercial potential. And this is Olmsted, and this is his book that came out of that. It was actually a series of articles he wrote for, I think it was the New York Tribune in the 1850s. And I could have chosen a lot of copies, but I just love the cover of this book because it's such a stereotypically Texas scene. We've all seen landscapes like this. And I knew who the artist was, and then I looked it up the other day, and lo and behold, well, Michael, who is the artist and the title? Albert Bierstadt, Immigrants Crossing the Plain. I called on Micah because it is at his institution in Oklahoma City. I thought, good grief. Of all the institutions and all the place, and he walks into mine, of all the talk, anyway. Olmsted's commentary on the abject conditions of life in Texas, especially for women, was borne out by the experiences of one New England woman who left a written journal and paintings chronicling her 4-year stay in the state that overlapped the time of Olmsted's visit. Sarah Harding came to Texas in 1852 to claim and try to settle a land grant that her brother had gotten. He was deceased. He had served in the Texas Revolution. She was accompanied by her alcoholic husband. She worked out of necessity as a school teacher and gave lessons in drawing and paintings in various locales. They had a series of hardships, not the least of which were fears of Indian attacks and her husband's increasingly frequent periods of drunkenness. The family returned to Boston, having been unable to sell the Texas land. Now, virtually every page of her journal testifies to the truth of one of the favorite aphorisms of pioneer Texans, cited by Noah Smithwick in his autobiographical Evolution of a State. Texas is great for men and dogs, but hell on women and horses. And this is my copy of the Smithwick book. And in case on the lower part of the cover, you have a blurb from J. Frank Dobie, who assures the prospective reader this is, quote, bully reading. Now, my students might have thought I was a bully for assigning the book, but anyway. Nevertheless, Sarah Harding left a series of striking watercolor scenes, composed primarily of landscape, city views, and paintings of homes of prominent Texas settlers such as Jacob D. Cordova and John Morrison. And I think, Ron, were you instrumental in getting these for Naaman Carter? Where's Ron? Were you at the Carter when that? Okay, so congratulations to Ron Tyler for this. Okay. Although an artist of only modest training and not a professional, two of her most aesthetically pleasing of architectural subjects portray missions in San Jose and this one, Concepcion, in San Antonio. Others of her paintings convey the flavor of 1850s Texas, such as plantation life and operation of a ferry across the Guadalupe River. Sarah R. Harding also contributed to painters' narration of Texas history. This home, pictured in Pleasant Grove, the home of John Morrison, had significance for her as the birthplace of her second son. However, for subsequent generations, its importance is denoted by this tiny human figure. I don't have a pointer, but on the lower right, there's on a red horse. I think it's possibly the earliest known painting of a working Texas cowboy, certainly one of the first. And he's driving his herd of horses from behind this picket fence down the sloping riverbank to Morrison's Ferry. I've always thought it was interesting this first painting of a cowboy is done by a New England woman who actually hated the place, but we adopted the cowboy anyway. And sadly, her husband soon deserted the family after they had returned to Boston. Okay, now this artist, Eugenie Abinel Lavender, also dealt with her share of hardships. I really wish I had photographs of her and more on her, because she was really a character, as the saying goes. She was born in Bordeaux, studied at Paris' School of Fine Arts in order to deal with loneliness following the marriage of her sister, who was her closest friend. Her instructors, Ari Schaeffer, Paul de la Rocha, and other painters in the Romantic Realist tradition significantly influenced her subsequent works. She painted historical pictures, portraits, and copied famous paintings in the Louvre, and she received recognition commensurate with that given to her fellow student, Rosa Bonheur. I'm sure most people are familiar with Rosa Bonheur. Now, this portrait of her, Edouard Dubuffet, he painted her, and Rosa painted the cow, since she loved animals. And the horse fair, this painting was, it's probably one of her very most famous paintings. When it was exhibited in Dallas in the first part of the 20th century, young, aspiring Dallas artist saw it, and it was one of the paintings that inspired him to go in a career, and you know him as Otis Dozier, and he mentioned this in an oral history interview. Okay. For example, in 1848, Lavender received a medal from the Academy for her painting, The Greek. It was presented to her, the medal by King Louis Philippe. In the 1880s, she wound up selling this painting to Mifflin Kennedy. So if anybody knows the Kennedy family and knows where I can find this painting, it'd be great to find it. We'll go back to still life with game birds here. Certainly has the elements of romantic realism, exotic game birds with the drapery, the foliage, the idealized landscape in the distance. Now, as far as her life, she married an Oxford graduate professor of science at the University of Paris, Charles Lavender. The bride's parents were less than thrilled about this. Her father wanted her to marry a French nobleman, had her sister done. In 1852, both sets of parents agreed that the couple should not immigrate to America, but they did, landing in New Orleans as a jumping-off point for a trek with 2 prairie schooners across Texas to settle in Dallas. I don't know how they settled on Dallas, but anyway. On this journey, they lost a wagon, crossed swollen rivers, killed rattlesnakes and panthers, were attacked by Indians, and saw prairie fires. But the most difficult aspect of the trek was she gave birth to their 3rd child, and had complications. He went to search for a doctor. I don't know where he thought he was going to find a doctor between Dallas and New Orleans and the prairie, but she delivered the child, cared for herself and her daughters by the time he returned. They actually passed through Houston, eventually settled in Waco. They were only the 7th family to settle in the area, and their 2 daughters played with a little boy next door, a guy named Lawrence Sullivan Ross, who we know as a legendary Texas Ranger captain, governor, and of course, president of Texas A&M. And yes, I know the legend about the statue and the pennies and the tests and all that stuff. The non-Aggies don't know what I'm talking about, and that's fine. Okay. Drawing on his science background, Lavender actually became the doctor in the Waco region. Now, during this period, his wife continued to paint. She used native pigments and clay to create her own art supplies. She painted local people and Texas landscape scenes. She hunted with a rifle, carried a pistol and a knife, and wore deerskin and a large wide-brimmed hat. I just wish she'd done a self-portrait that we could. I mean, I'm just heartsick about this. Their granddaughter remembered, quote, the vastness of the Texas prairies, the wildness of their surroundings, and the novelty of it all satisfied to a certain extent their yen for romantic life and nature. The fields of bluebonnets, the patches of paintbrush and Indian blanket, the purple mountain laurel all delighted them, and Mrs. Lavender made pictures of the flowers from the juices of the plant. She was nothing if not self-sufficient. After 2 years, they moved to New Orleans. Lavender established Audubon College, sometimes referred to as the Lavender School. They stayed there throughout the Civil War, but their youngest son died there during the war. Her husband died in the late 1870s, and she moved to Corpus Christi to live with her daughter. There, she executed this large painting of St. Patrick for St. Patrick's Cathedral in Corpus Christi, which is now the Cathedral for the Corpus Christi Catholic Diocese. So she spent the last 20 years of her life painting subjects like this, teaching art to family members and members of the Sisters of the Incarnate Word of Brownsville, Corpus Christi, and Victoria. She did this in a crucifixion scene, but she also did the still life with game birds that we saw when she was 75 years old. Now, this painting, St. Patrick, is undated, but it may have been one of her last works, because in talking to the folks at the Corpus Christi Diocese, there's some evidence that this painting is 10 feet high, and that she had to stand while she was doing this. I guess she's on scaffolding. And this may have caused her death. I mean, working on this painting was so strenuous. Okay. So as an immigrant from Europe, Eugenie Lavender was typical in another way of almost all the artists, male and female alike, in the state during that time, being a European immigrant. Perhaps the most prominent, and in my opinion, the most gifted artistic male-female team was Theodore and Marie Gentile, so I know needs no introduction to this group. Theodore was an award-winning student at several schools of art and mathematics in his native Paris before immigrating to Texas as a member of the Castro colony. And here he is as the official surveyor of Castroville, laying out the town site, looking through the stick stock, which is the alternate title for this painting. Now, Theodore, this is in 1844. His work was in 1849. He went back to Paris with a lot of paintings, hoping probably his relatives could sell them. In addition to this, and visiting friends, family's former art teacher, he got married to 19-year-old Marie Farreau. How he met her, anything else in the nature that we don't know. It's a complete mystery. Anyway, they returned to San Antonio, accompanied by Theodore's 16-year-old sister, Henriette. Now, Marie had received a thorough arts education, as evinced by her subsequent career as a longtime music teacher. One of her husband's students in his later years of teaching at St. Mary's College described Marie as, quote, a delightful little French lady, lively and vivacious. She taught music and could play wonderfully even then. Now, you can see that this is their dog, and there's a very faint caption below. I was in touch with Martha Utterback about what is the caption, and because it's in French, and I don't read French, and you sure don't hear me try to speak French. But Pauline was their pet dog, and Martha told me the inscription in French refers to the color of her eyes and the colors of her head, her paws, and her tail, which are black and fawn. Now, this is just one of many wonderful works that Martha uncovered in her work on the Theodore Gentile's Catalogue Raisonné, which right now is awaiting publication by A&M Press, and I really hope this can see the light of day really, really soon. It's been a work of decades. I've read the manuscript. It is spectacular, and the work that she's done is really wonderful. Okay, now, but Marie was also still in the visual arts. She and her husband both did paintings of this same Indian, Kiowa Big Tree. Her painting has been published with the title Indian Man Apache. And talking to the folks at the Woody, they can't quite figure out how this happened. Somewhere along the line, somebody gave it this painting, this title, and he's not an Apache because we know who the real person is. Here's his photograph. They were likely inspired by a photograph taken by William S. Soule, who was there's an album of 40 photographs of his inscribed to A.B. Stevenson, San Antonio, Texas, January 1st, 1876, in the Briscoe Center at UT. Now, we don't know why they chose to render this painting. It may have been because Big Tree was a notorious warrior. He participated in the Salt Creek Massacre, which was a turning point in the Indian Wars in the Southern Plains. And Ben Capps, the well-known colleague of Elmer Kelton, wrote a book called The Warren Wagon Train Raid, which is the account of this massacre. Now, Soule had been the official photographer at Fort Sill from its construction in 1869 until he returned to New England 6 years later, and that's where Big Tree was incarcerated. But how Soule knew Stevenson is a mystery, how Stevenson and the Gentiles couple got together is a mystery, but you know, San Antonio was not exactly a huge city then. It's understandable they would have known each other. Now, Theodore had done a few paintings depicting Indian life, so either side could initiate the acquaintance. He was drawn to the Texas Indian as an exotic subject, just as he was the San Antonio missions, Mexican culture, and heroic episodes of Texas history. But he took a more documentary than sentimental or idealized romantic approach to the Indian. Theodore Marie also shared an interest in natural history. The subject for many of these works were derived from a list of flowers common to the San Antonio area that he had composed in 1880. Their works were usually equally delicate and meticulous, and you only know who did which one by the signature. They each signed their initials in sort of a monogram. Now, he signed his work more frequently than she did. Now, these are two examples of her work. For example, as Martha Utterback told me, this rather strange-looking owl is signed, and the strangely marked cow is untitled and unsigned also. Now, another of her works, this one, Swallowtail Butterfly, shows she was interested in at least one other aspect of natural history. And this species of butterfly is not native to Texas. So she either added color to the lower wings of a native species or copied this from book or print. We don't know that much about her career-wise because she didn't really leave any writings, any papers. We just know what were notated on her musical scores and on her few works of art. Now, in 1852, Theodore's sister, Henriette, married one of Theodore's closest friends, Auguste Fretier. And their daughter, Louise, began taking art lessons from her uncle at a young age and was considered one of his best students. She studied at San Antonio's Ursuline Academy. By her early 20s, she was thought to be superior to her uncle in figurative painting. And She would go on to her own career as an art instructor, teaching art and language classes in the same building with Theodore. Now, his influence is evident in her work, and nowhere somewhere than in Watercart. You can see that they're very similar. She simplified the painting, probably trying to avoid imitating him slavishly. She leaves some things out, but added this woman in blue kind of in the background there. I found this photograph in Cecilia Steinfeldt's book, and I want to say, really, on my initial slide, I should have had Cecilia Steinfeldt. I would say none of us in this room who've done any research on Texas art and history would have gotten very far without Cecilia Steinfeldt. Either her work, and I knew her well. She helped me do a lot of research at the Whitty Museum. So I still miss Cecilia. She was the greatest. So this was a very common sight in San Antonio. Now, Louise also was interested in architecture. We can see this in the pencil drawing on the First Presbyterian Church. Now, despite being Texas's largest and most important city, San Antonio was described by U.S. Army Lieutenant Seth Eastman in 1849 as, quote, a wretched place full of desperate characters. I know, this is his opinion, not mine. I like San Antonio, for all you San Antonio people here. Anyhow, and there's Eastman right there with his fairly well-known pencil drawing of the Alamo. Nevertheless, throughout the 19th century, desperate characters and all, San Antonio and the nearby hill country were the center of artistic activity in Texas, and a magnet for European immigrants, the majority of whom were German. By 1847, about 7,000 Germans had settled in Texas under the auspices of the Adelsverein, a group founded by German noblemen in the 1848 political upheavals in Europe triggered more German immigration to Texas. In addition to Theodore Marie Gentiles, German immigrant Louise Wüste, and I'm trying to say her name, but nobody could say her name like Cecilia. I mean, she just, she said Wüste. I don't know how she did anyway, I guess because she was German. And Ken Hafertepe has written a chapter on her in the book, and I'm sure I have not read it yet, but I'm sure it's outstanding. So she was the daughter of a manufacturer and importer of paint. She studied at the Dusseldorf Royal Academy, known for its emphasis on realistic and historical narrative painting. Her two sisters had married prominent German artists. In 1824, she married Peter Wüste, a physician. He died at 37 after treating patients who contracted typhoid fever. For the subsequent 20 years, she taught portrait painting to support herself and her son and two daughters. But eventually, all of her kids left Germany for San Antonio. So when she was 54, she picked up and moved across the pond and moved to San Antonio. Almost immediately, she opened a studio. During the Civil War, she did move across the Rio Grande to live in Piedras Negras with one of her sons. But after the war, she came back, taught sewing and maybe drawing. There was a German-English school in the La Villita neighborhood, and she taught art classes. She executed portraits of other family members, such as this one of her daughter-in-law. She was the first professional woman artist and portrait painter in San Antonio and western Texas during the years immediately after the war, and supplemented her income by painting portraits of other San Antonio residents. But she also did some landscapes and pencils, but here's an example of her portrait, the Stoffel sisters. Wüste would periodically leave San Antonio to spend extended periods of time elsewhere in Texas with her children, including along the Rio Grande, did some works demonstrating interest in the people and landscape in that area. It's there that she passed away in Eagle Pass when she was visiting her son Daniel, whose wife we saw in the self-portrait right before this. It's hard to attribute her paintings since she only signed some of them, again with her initials. Her whole body of work, could be hundreds of pieces, has never been cataloged. I think most are probably in the hands of descendants and private collectors. Okay. Another German artist in San Antonio, Ida Weisselberg Hadra, was born in Castroville, but her German immigrant parents moved to San Antonio soon after she was born. Her father was a physician, moved to Austin, where he was appointed as superintendent of what was then called the State Lunatic Asylum, now the Austin State Hospital. His daughters were in the German-English school, where Ida was not just class Victorian, but also demonstrated talent for painting and drawing. This led her to becoming a student of the prominent landscape painter and German immigrant Hermann Lundquist. He was an instructor at the Texas Female Institute. At 15, she took first prize in pencil drawing at the Capital State Fair. There's Lundquist's very well-known view of San Antonio, his portrait by his brother-in-law. Friedrich Petrie. Now, Ida also studied under Erle Moss Duval. In 1882, Ida's life changed drastically. She married a physician, a widower with 3 children, Berthold Ernest Hadra. They moved to San Antonio, where she continued to study with Ella Duval, who moved there. Now, Ida Hadra painted a few still lifes and portraits, such as this one of her father. Although undated, it appears to have been executed pretty early in her career. Other portrait subjects included family members, a neighbor, and a sleeping dog. She also would go out in the area and sketch and draw painted landscape scenes around Austin and San Antonio. Her language's influence is pretty evident. Indeed, you have a comparison here of 2 of their paintings. She probably did this painting at his encouragement to copy it after his split rock on Shoal Creek, but as Cecilia points out in her book, Art for History's Sake, she does vary the rock formation so it's not a slavish copy. Now, she also served to document the appearance of Austin and San Antonio in the 1880s with paintings like this, view of Austin, with the slight sense of neoclassicism in the ruins of the 2 churches. Other Austin scenes include the old Ira Evans home and the Duval home, the family home of her art teacher. And San Antonio works, such as this one, which I love this painting. I know the Woody has this on their note cards, and it's a great choice. San Antonio River at St. Mary's Bridge. She could have had a really great career, but she died of peritonitis 9 days after giving birth to her 2nd child when she was like 24. So it's really sad. She was, I mean, to me, she's one of the unsung ones who could. She had so much potential. Now, I'm going to include a work by her daughter just to kind of finish off the Hadra story. That child also was named Ida, and her mother's sister eventually married Dr. Hadra to become Ida's stepmother. And then tragedy struck again when Dr. Hadra was killed being thrown from a horse. I mean, I'm telling you, life in early Texas was not easy. But her mother was able to support the family and let Ida study for a year with Robert Onderdonk. Many years later, Ida wrote to Eleanor Onderdonk, quote, "I can never paint as well as my mother, although I managed to become assistant art teacher to Eva Fowler at Kid Key College while I was young. My excuse for boring you with this account of my small talent is that I am proud to be able to write to you that my first and one of my most beloved art teachers was your father, R.J. Onderdonk." And Kid Key College is a women's college in Sherman. Unfortunately, very few works by the younger Ida have been located, and this is the only one I could find. It's this one of her father, probably done when she's about 15 years old, taken from this photograph. Miniature painting had kind of fallen out of favor, but make kind of a comeback in the beginning of the 20th century. Apparently, when Ida married Philip Crump Vines and moved to Dallas in 1909, she pretty much gave up art. She became active in the Dallas Art Association, which is the forerunner of the present Dallas Museum of Arts. Now, another San Antonio artist, daughter of German immigrants, Elisabet Ney. Her father, this is an interesting connection, her father was a druggist, and his drugstore sometimes was the office of Dr. Weisselberg, Ida's father. So these families obviously knew each other. She also studied at the German English School, and where her talent, her father had served as a founding board member. She was about 14 when she did this. This was typical of the art education given to Victorian young ladies at the time, probably copied it from a printed reproduction. Her skill motivated her parents to send her to an Academy of Art in Frankfurt, Germany, but she returned to San Antonio, married Julius Remmer. After his death, married a man named William Lorenzen. Not as prolific as artists from other European immigrant families, she may have given up painting on marriage, as did Ida Hadra Vines. Okay. I was happy to see a painting by Mary Chaput in the reel that we saw, which is really a good painting. It's really a better painting than this one, I think. Her primary interest was music and composing poetry. She probably never aimed to be a serious artist. She did study with Onderdonk. Cecilia Steinfeld believed in all likelihood this work was copied from an engraving or illustration, but stated that it, quote, displays a modicum of skill in the lacy texture of the dress, the soft skin tones, and the pensive expression of a child in repose. When I saw the artist's last name, I thought, that's familiar, so I did some digging. And sure enough, any of you who've done any research in San Antonio history, Frederick Chabot, the San Antonio historian, is her grandson. Okay, our final San Antonio artist, Eloise Polk McGill, was not a European immigrant. She was a direct descendant of President James K. Polk and grandniece of pioneer Texan R.E.B. Baylor, for all you Baylor bears out there. She began displaying her artwork at age 20 at San Antonio's International Fair. She studied with Onderdock and then moved to New York City, studied with William Merritt Chase, the Art Students League, and also in Paris. Now, returning to San Antonio, she opened a studio in Animal Heights and billed it as the Edgar B. Davis School of Wildflower Painting. Thanks to Bill Reeves for this slide, and Tom. When I saw that, I got to get a slide of Bill's book. Anyway, apparently this was an attempt to capitalize on the competitions to get people to come to her. Now, she painted a lot of wildflowers, submitted to the competitions, never won, but she did do a portrait of John Nance Carter exhibited at the Texas Centennial and the Pan American Exposition the following year. I can't say this for sure, but if you look at the Garner House website through the UT Briscoe Center, there's a big portrait in the background, I think in a dining room, and I think that's probably it, but I'm not for sure. She also did other watercolor portraits of prominent San Antonio residents, but did this prominent local landmark in Mission San Jose bell tower. So she took this kind of unusual angle. You see this photograph, almost the same place, except she took it closer and kind of cropped it out. It documents the pretty dilapidated condition of the archway on bell tower before the mission was renovated in the 1930s. And Cecilia notes, quote, "It has a nice plastic painting quality and pleasing colors in the warm tones of the stone walls in brilliant sunlight." Now, the best-known woman artist in 19th century Texas was undoubtedly Elisabet Ney. Thank you to Ken Haferteet for my Elisabet Ney photographs. One of the first professional sculptors in the state. Native of Germany, she studied in Munich and Berlin in a classical style. In Europe, she executed portraits of Jacob Grimm, Alexander von Humboldt, Giuseppe Garibaldi, Otto von Bismarck, as well as a full-length statue of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, which was installed in his replica of Versailles, Herrenchiemsee Castle. And he was also known as Mad King Ludwig and drowned. There was some evidence he had assistance in drowning because he was spinning Bavaria into bankruptcy. But he created this whole replica of Versailles on this beautiful island in this big lake. Okay, so in 1863, Elisabet Ney married a Scottish physician and scientist, Edmund D. Montgomery. They left in Europe the year Germany was unified in 1871, settled briefly in Georgia where their sons were born. In 1872, they moved to Texas and purchased Leandro Plantation in Waller County. For much of the next 20 years, Elisabet Ney managed the plantation while Montgomery busied himself with scientific work. But Governor Oren Roberts invited her to the Capitol in the 1880s, and she decided to resume her artistic career after speaking with him. In 1892, she built a studio in Austin, which we now know as the Elisabet Ney Museum, and started lobbying notable citizens in the state legislature for commissions, which she got. During the next 15 years, she completed a number of portrait busts, as well as these statues of Stephen F. Austin and Sam Houston that were installed in the state capitol, and the copies were later in the U.S. Capitol. And in Statuary Hall, of course, these are our state's two entries in Statuary Hall. Now, it's fitting I included Elisabet Ney last because she was kind of a bridge from the 19th to the 20th century for women artists. It's exemplified by the fact that one of the Ney Museum trustees was Emma Richardson Cherry, a well-known artist in her own right, especially in San Antonio, in this city right here. She played a crucial role in establishing important art organizations. Cherry, Olive Donaldson at SMU, Martha Simpkins at the College of Industrial Arts in Denton, now Texas Women's University, and Fern Thurston of El Paso are examples of women who built on 19th century foundations to pave the way for the many more women artists who have proved to be essential in Texas cultural life during the 20th century. Now that's all I have on those historical artists, but I do have a tribute to a person currently active in the Texas arts, my longtime and long-suffering colleague at SMU, Ellen Bowie-Newike. Happy birthday, Ellen. I didn't forget. Okay, now that I've embarrassed her and probably me, I will exit the stage.